Hi, good evening, everyone. Hope you're doing well at the beginning of the summer. I would love to introduce Julia Freeman tonight. I met Julia when she was a child at the town pool. We're neighbors and we go to the same town pool. And when I met her, I only had Peter and Paul because they're 16 months apart and they were babies. And, Julia was 8 or 9 years old. We're in the same town, but we're not on the same street. So we only see each other every summer at the pool. And I'm someone who doesn't miss a day at the pool. Almost like Julia's mom also, she's a teacher. So we don't miss a day at the pool, but I go more than her, just for the record. I used to go more. So she missed few days over the summer and kept the record of going every day. Julia watched Peter over the years, the struggles at school, different school, daycares, preschool, being kicked out of public school, communication trouble. And every summer she was seeing Peter growing up and with new challenges and so this inspired her to go actually and major in communication disorders. And she graduated May 15 actually from the State University of New York in Newport in communication disorders. She also had a minor in deaf studies and linguistics. And her thesis was about Peter, his apraxia of speech, his rare genetic condition, as well as, his journey till now, 12-year-old journey. So, Julia, we're all listening.
Thank you so much. All right, well, thank you all for coming. I'm really excited and honored to have the chance to present this to you all, as I presented it at school to my cohort of students previously. But yeah, this past year, I've been working on this project about Peter Najm and his KAT6A and just his life living with this rare genetic condition. And I've included a photo of Peter. So, as you all know, Peter Najm is one out of only 311 people around the globe who were born with the rare genetic mutation that's commonly referred to as KAT6A disorder. While he might appear to be a 12-year-old nonverbal boy on the outside, there is simply so much more to Peter. Peter loves to horseback ride, to go fishing and sledding and skiing with his siblings and his family. He goes out to dinner with them, and he loves going on trips to the beach, which I happened to bump into them one time at the beach as well, and museums with them and amusement parks. And when he's not working on and acing his schoolwork now, Peter also practices playing numerous musical instruments, and he's even in a band with his siblings. And this past year, they performed in a Christmas recital, and I just saw that July 4th, they're also going to be performing with each other, which is awesome. And Peter is just such a loving and helpful person. He's never afraid to get his hands dirty in the kitchen, helping out, or playing outside in the snow and the mud. He can be found painting and making art, and he's given me a few beautiful pieces of artwork to hang up around the house. Lots of animal inspiration. He loves to swim in the town pool, as Natasha said, and also in their new really cool backyard pool that's been keeping them busy over this quarantine. And even he can be found bike riding down the block with his siblings to go get some ice cream, just like any other kid. Oh, and Peter also has KAT6A. So, as we said, I met Peter at the pool years ago, and he was one regular at the pool who was hard to miss. We first noticed his loud voice. He was running all around. He's super fun. He's talking to everybody, just wanting to make communication with everybody. And when he would, he had a loud voice and a booming lip trill, and his arms and hands would be flapping at the water surface, creating lots of splashing. And he would grab our hands and clap them in the water too, and just share that moment with you of splashing, and you're there in the pool having fun together. And he warmed up to me and my mom pretty quickly, as we would spend hours of our days over the summer really getting to know him and hear about his life. And I learned so much from Natasha before I was so young, I didn't really know what speech pathology was, or communication disorders, or ABA therapy, or just all of these things that Natasha really opened my eyes to that were so inspiring and I had such an interest in. And the more I learned about it, I really felt a passion, like, this is what I want to do with my life. So that is why I decided to make this story my thesis project. And I'm currently in graduate school pursuing the master's in speech pathology. And yeah, I just can't wait to actually work with people like Peter and have my own clients one day that I can help. So all of you might be in this group because you're wondering, what actually is KAT6A disorder? And before I was doing research and meeting with Natasha, I did not know what this was either. But it is a gene mutation of the KAT6A protein on chromosome 8, which is a major protein that's involved in the packaging of DNA molecules. So first, some background information, if that might seem like a lot to unpack. Well, the KAT6A gene is responsible for making the KAT6A protein, which is involved in controlling the production of proteins from other genes in the body. Therefore, when there's a change on the KAT6A gene, problems can occur in various parts of the body. And currently, scientists don't know all of the functions of the KAT6A gene. But what they do know is that when a person has a mutated KAT6A protein, all of the cells in their body are going to be affected by this. So KAT6A is a de novo gene mutation, which means that most of the time, if a child like Peter or somebody is born with this mutation, their parents didn't have it or carry it or pass it along to them like other hereditary disorders. However, if a person does have the KAT6A mutation, there's a 50% chance that they will then pass the gene along to their children in the future. So how rare is rare for this rare disorder? Well, as of July in 2019, it's a couple years ago, there were only 195 patients in the world who were diagnosed with KAT6A. But as of February 23rd of this year, there were 308 known cases, and I believe the number is now 311. But Natasha, do you know if any more diagnoses have been made?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Today there's one extra.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
At least 10 more, yeah.
Wow, okay, so the number is rising, which goes along with our next point that doctors and researchers both agree that as the awareness for this disease increases, the prevalence, or the number of people that we're seeing being diagnosed with this disorder in the population, will increase as well, which makes sense. So one reason that there might be so few diagnoses of the KAT6A mutation in the world is because in order to diagnose this genetic mutation, whole exome sequencing must be done. But what is that? Well, let's start by discussing some of the basics of DNA. Something you guys might remember from back in middle school science class, DNA's formal name is deoxyribonucleic acid. DNA makes up all of the hereditary and genetic information in humans and just about all other living organisms. Most DNA is housed in the nucleus of the cell, where the commands are made and the information is sent out from. And the information that DNA carries is stored in the form of a code that's made up of 4 unique chemical bases: adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. And later on, they're just going to be referred to by their letters, A, G, C, and T. And just about every cell in our human bodies holds the same exact DNA sequence, no matter where the cell is in the body or what its job is. So this makes sense that if a person has a mutated KAT6A protein on chromosome 8 and it's causing an issue, that mutation is going to be in every single cell of that person's body, which is why issues could occur anywhere. So next, with that in mind, it's important to understand that the order or the sequence that those bases A, T, G, and C will create when they're joined together will determine what information the cells have available for helping to build and maintain an organism. and A bonds with T and G bonds with C every time they stay together, and the units that they form when they're together are called base pairs. So knowing the order that these base pairs are in DNA, or determining the order of every individual building block of a person's genetic code, is called DNA sequencing. And DNA sequencing has advanced the field of genetics greatly, and it's given researchers an ability to read the human genetic code to be able to determine if any mutations exist or causes for disorders or disabilities can be found. Because a patient might walk into the doctor's office and present that these are all of my symptoms, and they could even receive a diagnosis of something. But it's beyond that, the research, that if you're trying to find like a treatment or cure or something to help people who have, this diagnosis, they need to figure out what it's stemming from, what is causing this, and that is what DNA sequencing can do. So to find this KAT6A gene mutation, sequencing of the person's entire exome must be done. They have to look at everything. And when small pieces of DNA are grouped together and analyzed, they're called exons. But when all of the exons in a genome are referred to, they're called the exome, therefore whole exome sequencing. You have to look everywhere and make sure you don't miss it, because if the biologists only analyze the geneticists only look at a certain percent of the, the genetics, the genes, they might miss, oh, the mutation was here, and they won't find their answer. So because most known mutations that cause diseases occur in those small exons, whole exome sequencing is thought to be a very efficient method to identify those possible disease-causing mutations, as I explained. So what are some signs and symptoms of the KAT6A gene mutation that's on chromosome 8? How are all of the cells in the body going to be affected? Well, some common symptoms include developmental delays and disabilities, speech delays, gastrointestinal abnormalities such as constipations often, or obstructions that are hard to pass, heart problems, epilepsy, sometimes cranial or other malformations, difficulties feeding, acid reflux, vision problems, hypotonia or really decreased muscle tone, making it really hard for them to do things, and intellectual disabilities. And then some of the lesser common traits include having seizure disorders, frequent infections or sleep disturbances, autism, sensory issues, some skull abnormalities, and also some distinct facial features. And so what therapies are available to help children and diagnosed who have been diagnosed with KAT6A? Well, currently, the therapies that will be used to treat and manage this disorder are the same therapies used to treat any other developmental delay. And those include speech, physical therapy, occupational therapy, psychology, ABA or applied behavior analysis therapy. Also, some kids might be in special education classes in school, and even horse therapy, which I recently learned about, and that was super cool. And in addition to this, there have also been food and vitamin supplements that have been proven helpful in managing symptoms and pains in children with KAT6A disorder. So aside from all of that, though, while it may seem really scary, it's important to note that many parents describe their children as happy and healthy despite having global developmental delays. And one of those happy children, of whom I happen to know personally, is Peter Najm, who is pictured here with his family at an event for the KAT6A Foundation that hopefully one day I can attend an event for. But yeah, they're the founding members of, and you guys just do so much research for this that I'm really glad to become a part of the team and continue to work towards finding more information about. So for Peter, how was Peter's KAT6A discovered? Well, his mom told me when we talked that as a baby, Peter barely made eye contact with her, and he was very delayed when it came to walking. And he also had severe difficulties when it came to eating and swallowing solid foods. Even a banana he would choke on. So at first, his pediatrician, though, when his mom brought him in, was not too concerned with the developmental delays. But after Natasha pushed and got him, looked at again, He was later referred for neurological testing, which came back with a diagnosis of severe autism advanced or global developmental delay. However, it's important to remember that this was back in 2010, and there was no known disorder as KAT6A. Now, there's so much more knowledge of this specific gene mutation disorder and others like it, which is why this type of research is so important. So, what happened next? Well, with the diagnosis of autism in mind, Peter's mom, Natasha, contacted the State Department of Developmental Disabilities and set up appointments for him to be evaluated in speech, OT, and PT, and just get the ball rolling with all of that. So it was initially determined that Peter would receive 10 hours of ABA therapy weekly, and those were divided up into 2-hour daily sessions, which were 5 times a week. And for this, the therapist came to the house and were super accommodating. And he also was able to receive speech services 3 times a week and OT twice a week for half an hour each, and PT once a week for half an hour, and all of these therapies to try and help his development at such a young age. But when he turned 3, his early intervention care switched out of the state's hands and into the public school's jurisdiction. So what was school like for Peter? Well, for the first year, Peter attended a special education preschool program where he received lots of ABA therapy. And this did not turn out to be the best placement for him, while it's good for some people. Next, Peter attended a different preschool that had an alternative environment where he could play and have fun and while doing his work at his own pace, which was much better for him. But when it was time for kindergarten, Peter started at a public school in his district where he was able to have a one-on-one para with him to help him get through the day and complete his tasks and his schoolwork and use the bathroom and activities like that. However, a year later, while the new school seemed to be working out just fine, it's still a public school and parents are not always able to see what's going on in the classroom behind the closed doors. A little bit of a lack of transparency. And eventually Natasha found out that Peter's para was fired, and so he was now dealing with just random TAs in the building, could have been a different person every day, and they were not necessarily trained in special ed or nonetheless knew how to support someone who had greater needs, someone like Peter. And so much so they would even talk about him in front of him and belittle him, thinking he wouldn't understand them, except he did understand them. And he was smart, and this made him very upset, as it would anybody if you heard someone talking about you, nonetheless a teacher. So while Peter was nonverbal, his mind was not idle, and the teachers at his school were ill-equipped to work with him, and they disregarded him as if he did not know what was going on. But he did. And Peter was able to communicate this with his mom at home through typing and other alternative augmentative communication devices. After this incident, Natasha knew that Peter needed a different academic placement. He was not being challenged really in the school that he was at, and he wasn't receiving proper treatment from the staff. He was coming home, he wasn't happy. So she took him for another evaluation independently from the one that the school had given him. And while the school had marked his IQ in the 20 range, after the independent evaluation came back, Peter had received an IQ score of 145, which is incredibly gifted, highly intellectual, like just extremely academically smart and inclined, and he was being totally underlooked and undervalued in the public school placement that he was at before. So she knew something had to happen for him to get out of there. And finally, he was able to, and teachers were able to come to the house to do homeschool instruction for Peter, and this was able to last a couple of years before he was able to find really the perfect private school placement, or I should say before Natasha was able to find the perfect private school placement for Peter. And at the new school, he could receive his speech therapy, PT, OT, physical education class, and music class, which was his personal favorite. He is so good. He loves music. He can play a lot of instruments, and he is a level 5 NISMA scorer. That is hard for a high school student to achieve. He's just incredibly talented and inclined at music. So he was able to do that at his new school. He was also able to play outdoors all year round and learn about nature, which are things that he loves. And only healthy foods were permitted at this school, which was very beneficial for his diet in managing some of his symptoms. And the school had an alternative curriculum that moved at the student's own pace. So Peter's work could rapidly accelerate beyond the stuff he'd been doing previously. If he already knew those skills, he was moving right along and able to learn new things now. He was respected there. That's super important. He was encouraged to learn and grow and provided with the support and nurturing that he needed. So what were some of Peter's health complications that doctors didn't initially know were due to having his KAT6A? Well, Peter's being nonverbal meant that he was unable to communicate needs or pains to his parents or doctors. He suffered from severe constipation and indigestion, terrible abdominal migraines that could have been caused by obstructions, and therefore, again, he was unable to communicate this to his parents. He had extremely weak muscle tone, which is why he was unable to perform many tasks. And they also found high levels of acid in his blood, which caused a painful problem for his kidneys. And after a while, just all of this buildup might seem like just a person who, when he's screaming, oh, he can't behave, but really he has no way to communicate all of this going on inside of him. That it's just important to note that you can't behave when you're in this type of pain. He's not trying to act bad. He's having a hard time dealing with all of this internal stuff that really needed to be addressed. So why is having the KAT6A diagnosis so important? Well, why is knowing any diagnosis so important, any medical diagnosis? Knowing that diagnosis is knowing a piece of the puzzle. His parents and doctors could now give him the proper help and treatments he needed to soothe and improve his symptoms, which they did and were able to almost overnight, within days. He had a miraculous transformation. Shortly after finding out that Peter had this KAT6A mutation, his parents and doctors were able to connect with other people around the globe who had this disorder also, and find out what types of treatments were helping them and apply those to Peter's case. In little time after applying those new treatment techniques, Peter gained so much muscle tone, he was able to walk, run, and even ride a bike by himself within weeks. He was now able to be fully potty trained, which he was not prior, because he now had more control over those inner muscles and could hold in his urine and was able to regularly pass bowel movements that were not causing him buildup and backup and pains in his abdomen. And he was now able to sit still for a long enough time to learn how to read and play music, which is truly his calling and favorite pastime, is the music, as I mentioned. So what is the point in all of this? Well, through the power of modern technology and science and proper diagnoses and therapies and modern treatment techniques, people who are born with and live with rare genetic conditions can live happy, fulfilling lives, which might not have been the opportunity of those who lived before such advancements and developments in DNA sequencing came about. And I also really wanted to look into further and bring awareness to this specific KAT6A gene mutation because it is so rare and unknown, and just, as I said, just the awareness of this and the prevalence, hopefully we can just increase everybody's knowledge of this. And just to explain a little bit day in the life of how it is to be a person living with such a rare unknown disorder and the types of obstacles you have to face, and just how hard it is. And finally, just some takeaway points that I had when I was presenting to my school cohort was just that for me, hopefully more and more research about KAT6A will continue to be done in the future, as I believe this is an extremely important topic. Hopefully better therapy options, will be more specific and tailored therapy options can become available. And people who want to work in the special education, any kind of working with people, any people with a heart anyway, to have some sympathy and empathy when you're faced with people who might act or behave differently than you or seem like they're acting out, or you want to just roll your eyes at them. you don't know why they're acting like this, not even that they're having a bad day, but internally there might be physical reasons that they have no other means of communicating their needs. Just to keep in mind when interacting with people in the world. So that is my presentation, and thank you so much for listening. If anybody has any questions or anything for me.